I wanted to do a short video that can show you some alternative sources to learn about the war in Ukraine, the Russia-Ukraine crisis. I had a friend earlier today was asking me about my viewpoint, and he was saying, how do I know your facts are the correct facts? And I told him that, facts are the facts. Both sides agree on the facts of the war. It's how we interpret them. And what we're getting is a narrative that's based on a lie. That's my contention, is that the media is lying to us, and they've constructed a false narrative, and then they're interpreting the facts to fit their narrative. Okay, so I'm going to give you a few YouTube video podcasts that you can watch that kind of gives an alternative point of view. And these are not pro-Putin or pro-Russia. They're just trying to look objectively and abductively at what's going on. This is Dr. Steve Turley. Dr. Steve Turley, he's not a conservative or I guess you would call him a patriot. He's for Trump, but he's not the typical Trump supporter. He has a much broader view of geopolitics. I really recommend it. I would just say get in and start watching the videos, and you'll understand what his point of view is. This other guy here is called Gonzalo Lira, and Gonzalo Lira is on the ground right now in Kharkiv or Kharkov, and he basically is reporting every day what is actually going on from what he sees. I mean, he's someone that's actually there, and you can learn more from this guy in one sitting if you listen to him for half an hour than you can like in an entire course on geopolitics. The guy's quite amazing. He's very knowledgeable. And then the other two that I like are both start with the word the, so I have to scroll down here to the. This is the Duran, and these are two a Greek American and a Greek Brit, and they are also talking about what's going on, and their viewpoint is very solid. You see some of these videos are actually very long. Their podcasts go on for like 2 hours, so if you're on a 2-hour trip in the car, you can watch those. The gray zone is Michael Blumenthal's, Blumenthal? Yeah, Max Blumenthal. And Max Blumenthal is a guy who is a liberal. I normally would not agree with most of what he says, but it's interesting that there are even liberals like, Tulsi Gabbard and Max Blumenthal and some others who are kind of seeing through this unified neoconservative and liberal globalism that's describing what's going on in the war. Okay, so I would recommend those podcasts. This is an article I put together. I'm going to give you all these links down below this later, but this is called "A Word to the Ukrainians and the Belarusians" by Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn. This was written in 1991. It's a book called Rebuilding Russia. I've always known about this book. I actually wrote an article about this back a few years ago with some other articles by Solzhenitsyn, and very brilliant dissident during the time of the Soviet Union. And I'd never read the book until I started reading the book a few days ago, and it's quite amazing. He gives this was right after the Soviet Union fell, and he realized that now people were going to want their independence, and so he understands that the Ukrainian nationalists in the West would want to separate due to these really deeply held animosities that go all the way back centuries, and especially during the time of the Stalinist purges in Ukraine. And he says that, these animosities are wrongly equating Russia with the Soviet communists. They were Russians, such as Solzhenitsyn, who suffered under Stalin, who is not a Russian, is a Georgian. So the enemy was communism and Soviet communism. And he's saying that should these regions want to separate, it ought to be done by local referendum and not forced on the whole Republic of Ukraine by the tyranny of the majority. So he's saying that, for instance, if Crimea wanted to separate, they should have their own referendum and so on. That's not how it was done. It was just done like the entire country. So he was very prophetic in describing the problem that was going on. And he gives like a very short history lesson about Ukraine. Some people agree with it, some don't, obviously. And I kept the footnotes in the book in the same order that they were. So that's a good article for you. This is a speech from 2000 and, let me go back to find the original one. Let's see. This is a speech by Vladimir Putin. And basically, Vladimir Putin's speech that everyone says is very chilling is virtually identical to what Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn said. Solzhenitsyn was an advisor to Putin, and he gives a history lesson, very detailed history lesson about Russia and Ukraine. It's all factual. And again, it's how do you interpret the facts? Like, nothing that he says in here is incorrect. But people have described the speech as chilling, and Putin doesn't believe that Ukraine is a real country. And it's an oversimplification to say that he believes that. People like to learn things in little sound bites. I say it's a lie. It's taking facts and it's interpreting them along a narrative to say that Putin actually wants to reconstruct the Soviet Union. So I encourage you to read this. It's a little bit long, but you can read through it in a few minutes or skim it. The other speech by Putin was, let's go back a little bit to the summer. This is in January. This is a speech on the Donbass and the Donbass problem and the situation in Ukraine. This was the 21st of February, right before the war, right before the invasion, the special military operation. And he gives again a more recent history of what has gone on in the Donbass region. And so when people say that, Putin's invasion was unprovoked and unwarranted, and what's the other word that they use? It was baseless and so on. He actually does have a basis, an argument as to why they needed to, right? He gives reason. The republics of the USSR shall possess all the rights appropriate to the status of their sovereign socialist states. The supreme representative bodies of the power of the USSR republics can challenge and suspend the operation of the USSR government's resolutions and directives in their territory. And finally, each republic of the USSR shall have citizenship of its own, which shall apply to all of its residents. Okay, so he basically, lays out, what was the Soviet law and dissolution, and says that, things that were done not legally, and that is what led to the problem in the Donbass region. And he goes on and talks about the Maidan Revolution and so on. So, rather than just take the media narrative, I would say read what Putin actually says and see if he does actually have a case for wanting to protect the Donbass region legally. Okay. And then this one is interesting. This gives you the goal of the war. It says its goal is to protect the people who have been subjected. This is on the 24th. This was the day of the invasion. He gave this. I decided to conduct a specially military operation. Its goal is to protect people who have been subjected to bullying and genocide by the Kyiv regime for 8 years. And for this, we will strive for the demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine, as well as bringing to justice those who have committed numerous bloody crimes against civilians, including the citizens of the Russian Federation. At the same time, our plans do not, I want to highlight that, do not. Our plans do not include the occupation of Ukrainian territories. We are not going to impose anything on anyone by force. At the same time, we hear the West, there are more and more words that documents signed by the Soviet totalitarian regime which consolidate the result of the Second World War should no longer be carried out. Well, what's the answer to this? So he goes through this and describes how, there were certain promises made to Russia and so on. And there's another little history lesson that he gives there as well. None of this is chilling or unreasonable or crazy. It's all very logical, very reasoned. So you can agree with it or not, but this is not, these are not the rantings of an insane person at all. And one of the things that's interesting is he says our plans. So I found it very interesting when people have said that, the invasion is not going as planned. The way that I understand it is the demilitarization of Ukraine is to basically destroy the army first, and then get rid of the Nazi battalions that were in the southeast, like the Azov battalion and things like that. And people have read into this and said that, well, no, he wants to assassinate Zelenskyy, and he's calling Zelenskyy a Nazi, which is ridiculous because Zelenskyy is a Jew and so on. But I don't understand it that way. I understand it as literally what he says. He's saying they want to defeat the Ukrainian army in the east, and especially these militias, these ultra-nationalist militias, and some of whom are actual neo-Nazis. Okay, and we do not plan the occupation of the Ukrainian territory. So this idea that he's trying to conquer Ukraine, that he's going to get Ukraine, and then Belarus, and then Kazakhstan, and then the Baltics, and then into Poland, this is ludicrous. It's not it's not what Putin said. You can believe that that's a nefarious secret plan, but that's not what he said he's going to do. I'm going to show you a couple of maps of Ukraine. This is from UA Map. This is a Ukrainian website. You can see all the cities are in Ukrainian, not Russian. And this is the current status right now. You can see how there are armies placed all around the eastern and northern part of Ukraine, as well as the southern part of Ukraine, in the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov, which is this area right here. And Crimea was annexed by Russia by referendum, actually, which was an illegal referendum in Ukraine, but according to what was laid down in the time of the Soviet Union, they felt that territories should have the right to decide for themselves and not be ruled by basically it's just two different points of view what was legal. The rest of the world says it was not legal. Russia says it was legal. So all these little red dots are where they amassed armies. And if it's interesting to see that they have armies in the north, armies along the east, some in Belarus actually, and then some in Crimea. And then there's a blockade off the coast of Odessa, which is down here. This is Odessa. So this whole area is now conquered, basically. Odessa is not conquered, but the southern area is. And Mariupol, basically, it's surrounded on all sides. And right now what's happening is that the Russian army is going block by block. Okay, they're going through the city. And what happened in Mariupol, this is where the Nazi battalions were, essentially. These are people that were ultra radical. They were responsible for a lot of the unrest. They would do incursions into the Donbass region during the ceasefires, and the Russians blame these radical Nazi militias for disrupting the peace in Donbass after they had gained their autonomy through the Minsk agreements. So they're holed up in Mariupol, and Mariupol was going to be a bloody mess no matter what, because there's been reports that the militias are using human shields and so on. Okay, so if you look at this map, you might say, if you're not aware of the geography of Ukraine, if you have trouble finding Ukraine on the map, you might say, like, well, they haven't conquered all of Ukraine, so they failed. This is the media narrative, is that Russia has kind of failed in its objective to conquer Ukraine. But even though Putin said our goal is not to occupy Ukraine, it's to, demilitarize. Right now you had about 150 to 200,000 Russian troops and about 150 to 160 Ukrainian troops. There's many more people in the Ukrainian military, but as far as like boots on the ground, there's 60,000 of their best troops in the east, and the other 100,000 are scattered defending the different cities. Sumy, Kharkiv, which is right here, you can't see it, Kiev, Odessa, and then there are also troops in the eastern areas as well. And if you look at Ukraine, it's about the size of the nation of, it's larger than the nation of Iraq. And I don't know if you remember back to the time of the invasion of Iraq, but it took American forces over a month to get to Baghdad, which was here. And what they did was they bombed the whole infrastructure of Iraq, killed tens of thousands of civilians, finally killing up to 200,000 civilians. Then they would roll the tanks in. And even after doing it that way, they, took a long time to, to conquer Iraq. So, and it took a long time to get Saddam out of power. He was hiding for a long time and so on. So I don't think that that's what the Russians are doing. What they're doing is that they're targeting the military, and they're targeting military targets in civilian areas. There's human shields. There's also military targets in the cities. And that's what they're bombing. They're killing civilians, but it's not hundreds of thousands. I think the official numbers are between 1,000 and 2,000 so far. It's probably going to be more than that. I agree with that. It's probably going to be several thousand civilians killed when it's all over. But it's not in the tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands like NATO's wars. So when I tell my friends this all the time, and they don't like it when I say this, but it's true. If these are atrocities, a few thousand civilians, and Putin is a war criminal, then our presidents and NATO and our forces are war criminals 100 times over, because we didn't just kill thousands of civilians. Our nation killed hundreds of thousands. And I'm going to do another video where I go into that in detail. But if you look at the map, it looks like they're failing. Look, they only, they're saying they haven't really made any movements. They haven't conquered Kiev. They haven't conquered Kharkiv. And they just have like Kherson, and that's it. Not actually true. If you look at a heat map of Ukraine, okay, well, that's the Russian map. Let me show you. This is population density. If you notice where the population is, the cities are in black here. Black and dark red, okay? There are some cities in the east. This area of Ukraine used to be part of Hungary back before World War II. In World War I and World War II, Lviv was a Polish city. It was added to Ukraine later on. This is the most populous city. Kiev has 2 million people, and Kharkiv has over 1 million. That's right here. And then the rest of the population is along the coast. A lot of people in Crimea along the coast. A lot of people in Odessa on the coast. And there's this major city here called Dnipro. And so where are the Russian troops concentrated? Oops. Where are they concentrated? Right there. So this is the Ukrainian map of the war. And this is the Russian version. And you notice they're the same. They're not, there's not like, this is Russian propaganda and this is the true story. No. It's exactly the same story. I mean, there's some little differences where this has a lot more detail and it's interactive. This is a really great map. And it's kind of funny because all the little alerts on the side always talk about, a hospital being bombed or a, civilian something being bombed. It never really talks about what's going on here, which is the Donbass region. You see that there's nothing but Russian. Anything in red is Russian victories. Anything that's in, let me see if I can find this again. These are just air raids and so on. I mean, basically right now what's happening, and you won't know this from the news, is that the Ukrainian army is losing badly in these areas, in the populated areas. And I don't believe it's Russia's intention at all to deal with the West. I think it's protect the Donbass region, which is this area. It's 100% occupied by Russian troops right now. And then there is the Luhansk Oblast, which is the Lugansk region. And that's about 60 to 70% occupied by Russia right now. And where is the Ukrainian army? It's right here. 60 out of the 160,000 are here. And these are the best troops, the most well-trained troops. And so you can tell by the Russian map what the next goal is. Okay? You see where are the troops headed. What they've done is they've created these cauldrons. So this was 3 weeks ago, March 5th. This was March 5th, and then this is March 25th, which is 3 weeks later. It's now March 28th as I'm doing this, but you see the difference in, okay? It doesn't look like it's a tremendous amount of movement in 3 weeks, but it actually is. Remember, Ukraine is huge. It's the size of Texas. And they are fighting, there's 180,000 Russian troops, 160,000 Ukrainian troops. But what the Russian army did was they bombed all of the military, not the civilian infrastructure, but the military infrastructure. They knocked out all the airports. They knocked out about 75 to 80% of the Ukrainian Air Force, including their communication systems. And they destroyed all of the Ukrainian Navy. There's no ships left in the Black Sea. And the Black Sea is mined, and you can't get in or out of the Black Sea right now. Mariupol is cut off. You can't get in or out of Mariupol. So it's a matter of time before Mariupol falls. And the big thing now is they're trying to get civilians out. And the ceasefires are being violated, not by the Russians, because the Russians want the civilians out of Mariupol. It's the really radical Nazi battalions that want them inside so they can use them as human shields, which is an actual war crime. Firing at military target and missing and killing civilians is not a war crime. It's a horrible tragedy of war. The United States has done it, hundreds of thousands of times over, millions of times over in history. Killed millions of civilians accidentally by, if you think that Hiroshima was a military target, but we also knew that we're going to kill hundreds of thousands of people. So, and Nagasaki as well. So, the current situation is Kharkiv is surrounded by this cauldron. This is the strategy that Colonel, what's the guy's name? Colonel Doug McGregor says is a cauldron formation. It's kind of almost like a medieval battle strategy. You form a cauldron, you surround a city, and you don't attack a city because you'll lose too many men that way, especially when you're fighting like 1-to-1. If you're fighting 1-to-1, you want to have a 3-to-1 advantage. So the Russians are actually at a 3-to-1 disadvantage when you consider that, the Ukrainians have reinforcements. The Ukrainians have about, 3 times the number of people that could enter the war if they needed to. The Russians have about 200,000. 200,000 to, 600,000 to 800,000. I think it's 800,000. So it's like they're 3 or 4 times outnumbered, but they've managed to win the war. Practically they've won the war. And I'm going to tell you what I think is going to happen. Russians said that, I'm going to keep this short and just kind of wrap this up. Russians said that they were intent on first denazifying the country. And mainly what that means is getting rid of these radical militias down in the south. Okay. And the next thing is going to be to demilitarize. They want to defeat the Ukrainian military, and hopefully they'll surrender. Kyiv wants to keep this going forever, but we're starting to get notice that Kyiv wants to kind of agree. Okay, we've lost this area. Okay, they've literally lost Lugansk and Donetsk, and the only thing that's left is this pocket of resistance right here. And this is where the Ukrainian army is located. You see what's happening. These 60,000 troops, they're being surrounded. So once Mariupol is over, that's over now. That's phase 1. Mariupol is a mopping up exercise. All these troops are moving north, and what's going to happen? There's going to be a cauldron there, and then a larger cauldron around the entire eastern portion. I don't know if they will take Dnipro or not. Might not have to. They might just have to surround this area. And there's a couple of areas that are going to be very intense fighting. But once that's done, basically the war's over, because the rest of the armies are defending the cities. Okay, and they're not going to lead the cities. And the only thing is they have to do is to keep the Eastern Army from escaping. That's basically what's going on from there. I've never thought that Kyiv was going to be occupied. That could be a phase 3, like if Kyiv doesn't surrender and come to terms with Russia. Then the next phase 3, would be move these armies down. You notice the difference between this and this. They say, well, there's this 100-mile tank formation or 30-mile tank formation coming down from Russia and from Belarus. Huge amount of tanks. And our media is telling us that the Russians are losing badly, that they failed to take Kyiv. But I don't think that the intention was ever to take Kyiv. I think the intention is to keep Kyiv from fighting here. You see, to keep the armies in Kharkiv from assisting these armies, to keep Mariupol from assisting these armies. So they contained Mariupol, they contained Kharkiv, they contained Sumy, they contained Chernik. There's different ways of pronouncing this. Chernikov or Chernikiv, and then Kyiv. So this is the progress in the last 3 weeks. You see, all of these cities are surrounded. The only city that's not surrounded is Kharkiv has that cauldron formation. Sumy is surrounded. This city is surrounded. You can see what they're doing with Odessa. Mykolaiv is not conquered yet, but it's basically surrounded. There's no place for them to go, essentially. They can't go south. There's a sea there. They can't go east. They can't go north. They can't really go west because, there's no place for them to go to there. And then there's Odessa. There's a lot of Ukrainian armies in Odessa defending that city, but I don't think that the Russians are going to have to deal with Odessa or with Dnipro. I think that what's going to happen is just, this is going to be, they're going to wait until Kyiv surrenders. They'll surround Kyiv, they'll surround the larger cities, and just wait it out. That will be phase 3. And what we would like to hear in the West is that, what some Western media sources want to hear is that we're going to somehow assist these other troops and that they're going to eventually defeat Russia by a war of attrition. But that's not going to happen because once this army is defeated, there's effectively really no more army left. You have, half the forces left, and, these were the best fighters, essentially. So what will happen from there is that Kyiv will have to surrender. I thought this was going to take place a lot faster, but what I've been told is that, by these different sources I showed you earlier, is that basically Russia is moving very, very slowly to try to minimize civilian casualties. And that's not the message that we get. The message we get is that there has been huge tragedies, that cities have been leveled. Mariupol is in bad shape. Most of the buildings are still standing, but they're damaged. But most of these, all of the other cities, not most of them, but all of them, like Kharkiv and Kiev, and they have running water, they have electricity, they have cell phone, they have internet. I get emails from my friends in Kyiv, so I know I know how they're doing. And so they're going to try to capture these cities and get them to surrender. They're not going to destroy them. I saw I have to laugh at this because I've been in Kyiv, I've been in Rivne, I've been in Lviv, and I've also been in Mukachevo. And I know what all these cities look like pretty much. Lviv is a beautiful city. It's a Polish city. It used to be part of Poland. You can see by the geography that it was part of Poland at one time. Same thing with Mukachevo. It was part of Hungary. And what happened was I saw this. I was listening to the radio, and the guy said, the Russians are leveling cities. They're destroying, all these cities are destroyed. It's so sad because Lviv was once a beautiful city and now it's destroyed. Well, they've hit a few military targets around Lviv, but there's been no civilian damage in Lviv. There's been no bombing of the city whatsoever. And this is a guy that was reporting from Ukraine saying this. So what they're doing is essentially that they're lying to us, and they're saying these really exaggerated things. There are horrible things going on. Whenever anyone dies, when any civilian dies, it's horrible, and I'm not in favor of that. I'm not pro-Putin or pro-war, but the Russian armies have actually been very careful not to ruin beautiful cities like Lviv and like Kiev. Kiev is like the cradle of Christianity too in this area of the world. So they're not going to be bombing churches, and there's all these churches along the Dnieper River in this monastery area that's very beautiful. I spent weeks of my life out of there. It's a beautiful area. I've walked most of the downtown area of Kiev. I know what it looks like, and it's basically looks the same. It has not been destroyed, no matter what the media says to. So anyway, that's my short video. I know I've gone on for a while here, but I would like you to take a look at some of these links if you really do want to know the truth about what's really going on.